Okay, so today's book is a book I mentioned in a short video, Jonathan Freedland's biography of the man who broke out of Auschwitz, the escape artist. Now, what makes this book different is that he was the only Jewish person to escape Auschwitz. There had been Soviet prisoners who were not Jewish, and also Polish prisoners that were not Jewish that had escaped. And this book, I haven't finished it yet. I have listened to interviews with Jonathan Freedland on YouTube, and also some video interviews with the actual person who escaped. And he, what's fascinating, another fascinating thing about him is that Jonathan Freedland points out that the man who escaped, he was ignored by the Jewish community because he wasn't your typical survivor. And his motto was that he can never forgive Germany for what happened. He cannot forgive. Now, the other thing was that the man was clearly a genius for him to memorize all the numbers of the prisoners and trains of the people who were slaughtered. And another motto he had is that it's easier to kill sheep than it is to hunt deer. And this fellow was from Slovakia originally, and so he knew from growing up in Slovakia that it was a lot easier to herd sheep into the slaughterhouse than it was to hunt deer. And so he realized that the secret of Auschwitz was the complete deception and lie that enabled the mass slaughter to operate as an efficient machine. And so his goal was then to prevent the slaughter of the Hungarian Jews. And Auschwitz had to build a railroad extension to handle the Hungarian Jews because it was going to be 1 million Jews. And this author who escaped Auschwitz, he worked on the platform, and so he knew that the platform would not be able to handle that many Jews, and so he knew that the extension of the railroad was a real thing, and that just like a machine, that it was only a matter of time, an accelerating matter of time before the Hungarians would be slaughtered, and so his goal was to inform the Hungarians so that if they knew beforehand, then they could resist and shut down the efficiency of the Auschwitz machine, because the only way the machine could operate was based on the big lie, the big deception. And what's truly fascinating is that even some Jews were well fed once they arrived at Auschwitz. And the reason why is because they were to deceive any kind of surprise inspection that might occur. And therefore, the Nazis would be able to deceive the world by proving that the prisoners were well fed and entertained and comfortable. And there was 2 camps of these prisoners that were just deception for the rest of the world. And the first camp then received their special treatment, and that phrase, special treatment, was the code for the gas chamber. And each camp received it 6 months after they arrived. And even though the first camp was clearly slaughtered in the gas chamber, the second camp refused to believe that they were going to be just slaughtered like a machine, in a machine exactly 6 months later. And it just proved to this person who his real name is Walter, and he realized that people were in psychological denial. They were in deep psychological denial about their automatic death. And the reason they were in denial is because there was nothing they could do about it. And it wasn't until they were actually in the gas chamber that they started to complain, and their denial immediately vanished, and they started to cry out and struggle and fight against what their brains, their minds had to finally confront as the truth of being murdered, that they were about to be murdered. And so the author finally, I'm to the point where he's about to escape Auschwitz. Now, based on the interviews, there's photos in here too, but I know for a fact that he gets out the information, and there's a prominent Jewish leader who refuses to pass on the information, and he sits on it, and therefore the Hungarian Jews are taken to be slaughtered. And it wasn't until the actual urban city Jews of the capital of Budapest that the slaughter finally got stopped. And so this person who refused to listen, he actually got assassinated in Israel. And so the key point that I'm trying to make here, and here's Walter, who has a different name that he took on when he escaped. And here he got several medals for his heroism. And the key point here is that even though he was not silent, people would not listen. This fellow would not listen. And in noncommutativity, the word silent and listen have the same letters in them. And so based on commutative geometry, they have the same value. But in non-commutative geometry, even though he was not silent, he had to listen. And if you don't listen, then that's not the same as not being silent. And so people really emphasize to not be silent, that you will not be silent. But unless other people are listening, then the silence not being silent is not effective. And so you end up having this double negation in quantum logic that's called a double bind. And so it's neither silent nor not listening. And that's the double bind that then takes you to the absolute void of the emptiness. And so this the only way he could have escaped Auschwitz as a Jew and survive throughout his whole experience, where he had to originally escape Slovakia, and the death rate in Auschwitz was pretty much immediate for almost everybody. And so there was he went against the odds so many times that it's impossible for it to have been just random, that his willpower had to be guided by something greater than just himself, that he had tapped into, that he was, because he believed in the truth so much, and he wanted the truth to get out, and he realized the whole power of Auschwitz was based on the big lie. And so this idea that the truth will set you free is what really motivated him to be a genius and memorize all this information and details. And Jonathan Freedland tells this story where this man, he was in a restaurant, and the waiter serving him had a tattoo from Auschwitz, and Walter immediately told the waiter where he was from and what date he had arrived at Auschwitz. And so that proved that he knew precisely what the code was of Auschwitz, the information code that he had memorized. And so Alon Khan, the Fields Medal math professor, he makes the big point that the word listen is not the same as silent, even though if you're playing Scrabble, the words are commutative, so they have the same value in terms of letters that you can Scrabble. They're commutative, so the order does not matter. But the truth of meaning as music is based on listening that's not silent. So you listen in the silent, but you have information that then creates matter as life. It creates new matter because of the difference between silence and listening. And so this is the great secret of the difference between being silent and to listen to the source of the silent, of somebody to realize that when you're listening, there is no silence, that the source of listening is never silent. And so that's the secret of music being non-commutative. And in the Jewish tradition, this is called the shofar. The shofar, because what happened is that Moses went to the top of the mountain to get the 10 Commandments. But the Jews down below, all they heard was the shofar. And that's considered to be the primordially repressed. That's what Freud called the primordially repressed, was this sound that doesn't have any meaning because it's just the sound of God as the shofar. But Moses could he could listen to the word of God as the shofar. And the secret of the shofar is that it's the horn of the of an ungulate, some kind of ungulate. Maybe it's a ram, maybe it's another kind of animal. But with the ungulate, the spiral of the horn is different for the left side and the right side of the skull. The horn goes different directions. So you have a spiral that has a different chirality, a left and a right spiral. And that's what makes it noncommutative, is when you have the left and right spiral at the same time and they connect together through the dimension that's pure time that cannot be seen. It can only be listened to from the future. And that's what is happening all the time, as the source of the truth of reality, is the truth of the shofar. And so I haven't finished the book yet, but that's the real truth of this book, is that even though he wasn't silent, people could not listen to him. Even the Jewish community could not listen to him after he survived, because he refused to be a passive sheep, and he still had anger about it, because the truth, he had righteous anger as the truth that he would not be silent about, and people couldn't listen to it because his appropriate emotion was righteous anger. And because people are sheep, they cannot accept that righteous anger would be an appropriate emotion that can then be turned around internally as wisdom in the body and transformed into love as the truth of reality. And that's what he did by memorizing all that information. He transformed his anger into wisdom as the truth of reality. And then he got that out to the world so that the world was warned. And it was just a matter of whether the world would listen to him or not. And there was a delayed response, but they finally did listen. He was able to save like over, maybe 200,000 people, at least over 100,000 for sure, over 120,000 people for sure. So he should be a household name, the guy who achieved this. This is a spiritual book, because how could you overcome so many odds against you in a killing machine? And the only way he could do that is because he was helped. He had the power of the universe, of God, or whatever you want to call it, through his heart, through the truth that he listened to, through his own heart that he achieved. And so I think the name he went by was Rudy, but his birth name was Walter, and I don't even know his last name. I don't remember it because I don't get stuck on names. I'm not a name person. I'm more interested in meaning. And that's the true meaning of this book, is that he became an impersonal embodiment of the information of Auschwitz, like a computer, like he memorized it. But it was the information of love. Walter Rosenberg, that was his real name, Walter Rosenberg. But when he escaped, he went by Rudolf Vrba was the name he used when he escaped, and so he lived by that name for the rest of his life. And I will finish the book, but I wanted to share this secret meaning because he's about to escape as I'm reading it. And you have to be able to emotionally process what is the meaning, of him trying to escape, and the significance of the fact that people wouldn't listen to him at first. And there's a difference between not being silent and people not listening. The rest of the deportees had disappeared, leaving only silence, and yet Walter's words still made the doctor shake, because now he knew. Collecting himself, Pollock asked what he could do. Now it was Walter's turn to ask the questions. Was anything left to the organized Jewish community of Slovakia? Did any groups still exist? Anything approaching a leadership? So, what's amazing is that he had all this information memorized. Now, he said that the way he memorized it was like a children's game where he would add new information every day, but then every day he would repeat the same information that he already knew, and then he would add another new piece of information. And by repeating everything he knew every day, then he was able to keep it all memorized and then keep adding more information. And so that's actually the secret of repetition that never truly repeats itself, because every time you repeat it, you're adding something new. And that's the secret method that he used. But it's also the secret method of music, because most people think of repetition as being boring, but this proves the true power of repetition, because the memorization process when you learn music, for example, is that you're always able to learn how to learn and to take in new information all the time. And this is what he was able to do because he repeated every day everything he knew. He repeated it. And then because of that, he was always able to memorize more information every day. Now, most people would think, well, repetition is boring. But here he proved that repetition was the whole secret of how he was always able to learn more and more every day. And so that's what the secret of music is like, most people, they don't want to learn a musical instrument because they think it's boring. They think it's boring to have to repeat the same thing over and over and over. But you're actually never really repeating it because you're always learning something new each time, even though it might be imperceptibly tiny compared to the whole of what you're repeating. But when you add it all up, it's this vast, infinite factorization of information that's never the same. And that's because it's noncommutative, because you're changing the order of time when you repeat it back to yourself, as the new information is now being reversed. So it's a fascinating book, for sure. And my whole point is that this book is a metaphor for civilization as a whole, and that actually modern civilization is a death machine, and that it's accelerating the expansion of death, just like Auschwitz had to be expanded to incorporate another order of magnitude of efficiency of killing for the Hungarian Jews. And so that's what's happening on Earth, is that there's a constant expansion of the efficiency of killing as an order of magnitude. And people don't want to believe it because they're in denial about what is the truth of so-called civilization, because most people can be distracted like sheep. They can have entertainment and have, be well fed and have nice clothing. And so even though they're about to get murdered by the machine, they will be in complete denial about it until at the very end, when they get the plug pulled on them, or they get murdered, or whatever it might be at the the way the machine kills them off at the end. And so the question is it still possible to escape the machine? And the way to escape it is the same way that Walter Rosenberg escaped Auschwitz, is that it is a spiritual transcendence of this dimension of reality itself, so that the information is always constantly new all the time, from the future harmonizing with the past. And so he was guided by the future, and because he was constantly taking in new information from the future and harmonizing it through repetition, he was able to miraculously survive and escape this death machine, and then tell the world about it so that they could prevent further expansion of the death machine, and they could slow down the death rate. And so this is what we face today on Earth, is that we can't just repress what the death machine is. We can't just pretend to forgive, because the forgiveness has to only happen through a situation of safety. And if there's no safety, if you're still not safe from the death machine, then you can't forgive. So that's why, like in the Shaolin monasteries, the most powerful monks are the Qigong masters that meditate all the time. But the only way they're able to do that is because they're protected. They're protected by the rest of the monks, the warrior monks. And you find the same thing in India, where the most powerful yoga masters are called Jnana yoga masters, which means mind yoga. Jnana is from dhyana. Dhyana means concentration. Dhyana became Zen in Japan, but it's from Chan, in China, and the Chan Buddhists are the Shaolin monks. And so there's a direct connection between the Yana yoga masters in India and the Shaolin monks. And the Yana yoga masters, the only way they could do the mind yoga is by being protected by the warrior caste in India. There has to be a warrior caste that protects the Brahmin priest caste, and the Brahmin priests are then the Yana mind yogis. And so this Walter Rosenberg, he was protected because of what he knew, because of his information. And he started as a young age where he was constantly learning. So he learned languages. That's what he did when he was young. And because he was able to translate Russian and other languages, that's what gave him he was valued as part of the resistance in Auschwitz, and that's what enabled him to survive in Auschwitz, and then not to survive, but then to organize his escape. And they used the word organize to mean using the resistance to accumulate value. So even in this death machine in Auschwitz, there was a secret counter flow of information that he was secretly at the apex of without anybody else even knowing it, because of what he was constantly memorizing in his head in silence. And then he turned that silence around to the rest of the world. And then it was up to the world to listen to him. And that was what the real challenge was the difference between silence and listening. And in the end, it is the listening process that then overcomes the silence. And so being silent is what the Yana yoga master calls Murna Samadhi, and he says that's the highest level of samadhi. It's Muna means silence in India, and I don't know if that's Sanskrit or Tamil, but Ramana Maharshi uses the names Muna Samadhi is the highest level of samadhi, the silence samadhi. But Ramana Maharshi was not being just silent, he was listening. And listening is called vichara. Vichara means an internal investigation to the source of the I thought. The source of all thoughts is the sense of I. And so by purifying his ego, then he was so concentrated on the source of the I thought that he was able to take in the information of the constantly new information of everything around him. And that's what Yana Yoga means, is that you're constantly resonating with this formless awareness from the future. And that's what creates the whole universe. Even the astral realms of heaven and hell are created as light from this formless awareness that's an ether. It's an ether as a force. So it's an information force that can never be seen, but it can be listened to in the silence. So that's all I'm going to say, and I look forward to finishing this book.